beating and killing of our clergymen and young people will not divert us. We're on the move now.
Yes, sir.
In recent weeks, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the March in Selma for voting rights. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed this landmark federal legislation in 1965. Unfortunately, the key part of this legislation was invalidated June 25, 2013. While we as a nation have come very far, there are still instances of inequality for African Americans in our society. With the power of the media, as a nation, we no longer have the privilege of turning a blind eye to these issues. Why does justice and equality under law remain an issue for African Americans who were forced into slavery and brought to the United States against their will 400 years ago? Right here on Fisher's campus, professors, faculty, and students have come together to tackle the hard conversation of injustice and inequality for African Americans in America. The conversation has dealt with issues of biological homogeneity between the races, past racial issues on Fisher campus, and the future of our society. Why did the faculty and staff deem it necessary to host this series on campus?
It really came together very organically after the decisions not to indict Darren Wilson in Ferguson and also not to indict the police officers in Staten Island in the Eric Garner case. So I think faculty on campus were having these discussions in individual classes with students about those situations and what had precipitated them, but also what they meant. And a number of us just ended up in conversation like on Facebook with talking about these things happening in our classes and felt like it was not being addressed here, and that as an educational institution it's a worthy question to ask is why are things the way they are and can they be different?
For those who were unable to attend the series, could you give a brief description of what the events entailed?
So there were a series of dialogues, all kind of around the issues of race and equity. So, and we really structured them into these three categories. The first one was reviewing some of the material that was covered in the videos that we asked people to watch beforehand. And that was mostly about the history of the race concept in the United States and how government policies have created sort of different classes of people, and that doesn't really have a basis in anything biological. It's really a social construction. So that was the first one, and then the second one was looking at, well, how have those policies sort of played out in people's lives, and what do we see in terms of the implicit racism and explicit racism, both on campus and in the region, and actually in the nation. So we kind of tied it into what was going on in Ferguson and in Staten Island, which were the big events that sort of brought us together to begin with. And then the last program was really sort of what are we going to do going forward? What do we see as changes that might have to happen on campus or in our own lives or in the broader community that can help relieve some of the conditions that have created these issues in other places.
If there was one thing that you and the other staff that worked on the series wanted students to take away from the series, what would it be?
That's an interesting question, because one of the things that was very great for me in working on this program was that those of us who came together around this issue, I think, had sort of different goals in mind. So just speaking for myself, I think what I really wanted people to walk away with was the idea that race is this social construction, that there aren't, something that seems so self-evident to us, that there are differences among human beings and that you can classify people into races. There's not a strong biological basis for that, and that these are all socially constructed differences. And then the differences that we see today in terms of economic differences between African American and white communities really have to do with government policies in the past. Again, they're not natural differences. These were things that we created and that we have maybe an obligation to take apart.
Events like the Institutionalized Racism, Inequity, and Bias event Fisher hosted during Black History Month are so important. Keeping the conversation concerning inequality is imperative for the future of our society. This is Chelsea Marshall reporting for Fisher News.